everybody. We are back once again, and I am here today with somebody I am super duper excited to be here, Wesley Roberts. Hey, man, thank you for hanging out with us
Thank
today.
you very much.
Yeah, so we actually met basically on the day of the 100th anniversary of something called the Scopes Monkey Trial. This is something that was really a big deal in a lot of ways for education, for science, for religion, politics in this country. And we just happen to have this really cool 100th anniversary celebration. And we're gonna talk about that in a second. But the first thing I want to talk about is just who are you, man? What do you do? What's your background? And how did you get interested in the Scopes Monkey Trial?
Great. I am a retired public school teacher. I taught biology mostly in a 38-year career in public schools, mostly in high schools in Nashville, Tennessee. I became interested in the Scopes Monkey Trial probably around 1988 when I was a biology teacher.
Okay.
I remember I had several friends who were interested in it, and then when I caught the bug, I started reading everything I could about it. I visited Dayton, Tennessee. I got a copy of the transcripts.
Oh, wow.
And the transcripts are about 450 pages.
Really?
And I read it cover to cover. And then using that, I created a play of the last 2 days, which are quite significant, and I'll get to that later on. I condensed it, took out as much legal jargon as I could, and used that as a play to introduce the concepts of science to my biology classes for the next 30-something years.
Wow.
It was such a good way to introduce the concepts of science because of the contrast in the two philosophies that were being presented.
Yeah.
So I visited, as I said, I visited Dayton many times, met some of the people who had actually been at the trial, which was quite eye-opening for me.
Really?
And I always like to consider that the Scopes trial is a crown jewel of Tennessee history. Now, some people are quite proud of it, some people are not. Either way, it's still such an important thing. And as you said, it's not only important in Tennessee history, but in American history as well.
Right, right. There was a lot. There was a lot that was kind of on the table here. There,
Quite a bit, yes.
and the kind of, I mean, the ramifications that we've seen for this for literally the last 100 years are still playing out today in Tennessee. I mean, we're not going to go super deep into it, but we, obviously you and I know about all of the different charter school things and what they can and can't teach. And, is it okay to talk about these religious concepts? Is it okay to talk about these scientific concepts? So, I mean, yeah, what is the Scopes Monkey Trial? Were we like judging monkeys? Were we judging people? What was happening, man?
What was happening was the state legislature had a very strong reaction to the early 20th century concepts of what was termed as modernism in those days. Modernism was, it had several platforms, several sociological and several political platforms. One of the key tenets of that was that people were experiencing new social and psychological sciences such that they were learning things like, well, perhaps it's the case that mental illness is not caused by demons. It's instead caused by environmental factors and also biological factors. And also a lot of people in those days who were modernists were starting to challenge some aspects of scripture such that they were finding out that there were lots of people who were authoring that. It wasn't necessarily a supernatural deity who was writing the Bible. So that brought out a lot of conflicts in the Bible. And one of the culminations of the Scopes trial was one of the lawyers trying to get the other lawyer to say that you cannot possibly take every bit of the Bible literally, that you have to do interpretation. So there were a whole lot of evangelists who were starting to use the radio and starting to use film to really reach big audiences. Two of the main ones were Amy Semple McPherson, who was a almost a starlet in that she was using Hollywood props. She would ride a motorcycle across the stage at her revivals and call herself the patrolman for God. She would put herself in Hollywood costumes and stand in front of bright lights so that she looked like an angel.
Oh my God.
And she also said regarding the theory of evolution that referring to the teachers who taught evolution, that the monkey teachers should be hanged and burned, that she was so
Really?
afraid of what was going on with that.
Wow.
Another evangelist was Billy Sunday, and he was a really fire and brimstone kind of guy. And he was also calling just short of execution of evolution teachers, because they were convinced that that was going to lead children away from Christianity and into atheism, into the pit of atheism.
Sure. And thus the hellfire, brimstone,
Yes.
the eternal separation, all that terrible stuff
Yes.
that many of our audience will be familiar with,
Yes,
for
that's
sure.
exactly right. So
Wow.
Billy Sunday in 1925 held a giant revival in Memphis, and so many people attended that it was equivalent to 10% of the population of Tennessee at the time.
Really?
And he really preached against evolution. That was one of his main themes. So one of the people who was affected by that was a legislator from Lafayette, Tennessee, named John Washington Butler. John Washington Butler sat down one Sunday morning after he'd been to church, wrote out a bill that became known as the Butler Act.
Okay.
And the Butler Act said that any teacher who denies the story of the divine creation as set forth in the Bible and instead teaches that man descended from a lower order of animals, which we can get to later if you want to. But
Sure.
legally, that doesn't make much sense. But he presented it to the legislature. There was some outcry against it, but mostly it went through fairly easily. And in March of 1925, Governor Buford Ellington signed it, and it became the law of the land.
So this, okay. So that's a fascinating timeline, because in April of that year, 100 years ago, this law goes into effect, and the trial occurs in July,
Right.
like months after.
It was a very quick turnaround. And the way that started was that in Dayton, Tennessee, the mining industry there was starting, years before that, had started to collapse. And there was a man named George Rapelier who was from New York. He had moved to Dayton, Tennessee to work in the mining industry, and saw that he was accepted in the community as a foreigner from New York. But he decided that it would be good for the city of Dayton, Tennessee, which is just north of Chattanooga on the Tennessee River, a small community of about 1,500 people. He believed that to bring that trial to Dayton would boost the economy of the town. He was absolutely correct. He didn't know how correct he was going to be.
Yeah.
So on an April morning, he went to F.E. Robinson's drugstore. And F.E. Robinson's drugstore was a place where lots of people in the city would gather. He talked to F.E. Robinson, Walter White, who was the superintendent of schools, several other leading citizens, and he showed them advertisement in the Chattanooga newspaper that said, from the American Civil Liberties Union, that said, we need a teacher who would be willing to test this new law that just went into effect, the Butler Act. So they started discussing it, and they said, well, we have a biology teacher in our school, and he's married, and he has children, and we're not so sure that he would want to be on trial and have all this publicity surrounding him. And so one of the people at the table said, well, what about that John Scopes fellow? He's a first-year teacher. He's from Kentucky, and he's the chemistry, physics teacher, and he also coaches football. So they said, well, he's down the street playing tennis. Let's get him. So they sent a boy down the street, said, they want to see you in the drugstore, Mr. Scopes. So he comes down there. He's got a towel around his neck. He's got a tennis racket over his shoulder. And he says, yeah, what you want? And they said, well, look at this ad in the newspaper. Can you teach can you teach biology without teaching the concepts of evolution? And he says, no, it's much too important to have the concepts of evolution. And they said, well, what about this? And he looked at the ad in the paper, And they said, would you be willing to be that teacher? And he says, okay. And then he went back and finished his tennis game. Well, that afternoon, they basically wrote up an indictment. They took it to the judge, and they indicted him that afternoon and sent the information out to the newspapers in Tennessee.
That he had taught evolution. He had violated this law that just came. They went and did the indictment that day.
They did the indictment that
crazy.
day. And he had also said he wasn't sure if he had ever taught evolution because he had substituted for the biology teacher in the spring, apparently after the law had been passed. But he didn't really remember teaching evolution.
Sure.
But it was in the textbook that the State Textbook Commission had approved for classes in Tennessee.
Okay.
So if he had used the textbook, which he had, and it had evolution in it, they were just kind of saying, okay, well, that's good enough.
Right.
And since he had agreed, then nobody really objected to that.
Right.
Yeah. Now, they had to call a special session of the grand jury because they wanted the trial to be in Dayton. And when Chattanooga heard about this, then they thought, well, we could get this trial instead. So they called a special session. They indicted him with the grand jury within a few days. And that set the trial in motion.
Wow.
Now, after that, there was a whole lot that happened as far as Scopes went to New York. He interviewed with the ACLU. They were trying to select a lawyer. And so the person that they decided to select was Clarence Darrow. Clarence Darrow was a very prominent defense attorney in the United States at that time. He would do things like take on impoverished clients, which didn't make him popular. He had also defended Leopold and Loeb, who were two young men in Chicago who had decided they were so smart that they could get away with anything. And what they unfortunately decided to do was to murder a 12-year-old boy in a Chicago city park.
Gosh.
Now, they were caught right away. They weren't so smart that one of them didn't drop his eyeglasses at the scene of the crime. So they traced them. Everybody knew that they were guilty. The only thing Clarence Darrow could do would be to save them from the death penalty, which he was able to do, and that made him very famous and also extremely unpopular. People wanted these guys to be put to death.
Yeah.
So he did decide, Scopes decided that he wanted Clarence Darrow. On the opposite side of that, a lot of people who were anti-evolutionists decided that they would ask William Jennings Bryan, who was a very prominent evangelical figure in the United States, and he had been Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson.
Right.
He had also run for president three times, 1896, 1900, and 1908.
He was a big deal.
He was a huge deal. He was very, very well known. And for the fundamentalists at the time, he was their hero. So he would speak in Chautauqua tents. He would speak at revivals. And he was gifted with having a voice that was so powerful that at one time he stood in Madison Square Garden and spoke without a microphone and was able to fill up the auditorium with his voice. It was that powerful. That's pretty impressive, yeah. And a gifted speaker. He was so eloquent. Well, he was chosen to help with the prosecution. So again, a whole lot happened in between April and July when the trial came to Dayton, Tennessee. Once it began, then Bryan was the lead prosecuting attorney. Darrow was the leading defense attorney. And the trial began. Now, in Dayton, the trial took on the atmosphere of a carnival.
Yeah, talk about that.
Okay.
What happened with? I mean, again, this is an incident that the law has just passed. Very quickly afterwards, basically, these guys, I mean, manufacture this trial pretty much.
Very much so.
Okay, and to bring in all that economic activity, and it
worked.
did.
It worked, yeah. F.E. Robinson printed up a book called Why Dayton of All Places and sold it at his drugstore. And also there was a lunch counter, there was a soda fountain, and they made a whole lot of money. There were two hotels in town which filled up right away. They had to convert one old abandoned mansion into a place for all the reporters.
Really?
People in the town rented out their houses. I mean, it was a huge economic boost. So thousands and thousands of people came to Dayton. It was such a carnival atmosphere that that there were four corners of the courthouse square. There were preachers on every corner competing with each other, such that they eventually had to make a schedule for each street corner preacher to have an allotted time on the corner. And one of the children at the trial was Effie Robinson's daughter. Her name was Frances, and she was a person with whom I spoke in the early 90s.
Wow.
And I asked her name was Gabbard at the time. I said, Miss Gabbard, what is it that you best remember about the trial? And she said, I really don't remember much, but I remember the monkeys. People brought monkeys and chimpanzees to Dayton, and they were all over the place doing tricks, and people just loved it. So she loved the fact that all the little monkeys were in the trial.
That is so cool, because you hear some of those stories, and of course it's called the monkey trial and stuff. But I mean, there literally were people dressed in monkey costumes.
There were.
There were people bringing pet monkeys.
Yes.
I mean, they were serious about it.
They were quite serious. There was a movie star monkey named Joe Mindy, and Joe Mindy was prominently featured there. There's some great photographs of him sitting in Effie Robinson's drugstore drinking Coca-Cola and just that kind of thing. They were selling hot dogs. They were selling cotton candy. It was very much a carnival atmosphere.
Wow, that is interesting, man.
And of course, the bottom line is that they were making lots and lots and lots of money on this. So, as the trial continued, then the crowd stayed. They managed to spread it out over 9 days of courtroom, but 2 weekends. So Dayton was really flourishing with all this.
So for almost 2 weeks, there were all of these thousands and thousands of people in this town, a town that, I mean, again, we were there not long ago. A town still to this day is pretty tiny.
It's a very small town.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was only the downtown area. So again, about 1,500 people living in the town and the surrounding area. But by the time the Scopes trial was going on, there were probably at least 3,000 people who had descended on that. Reporters from all over America. WGN Chicago set up a dedicated telephone line so that they could broadcast the trial live over the radio. And that was the first time it had been done. They were paying about $1,000 a day, which was big money in those days.
1925, that's quite a lot of money.
Right. And they paid that. And so a lot of America, if you had a radio, then you could listen to the proceedings of the Scopes trial. So there was also, in 1917, the transatlantic telegraph cable was laid in the Atlantic Ocean. By the time 1925 rolled around, there had been a lot of information transmitted, but the Scopes trial had more words transmitted across the Atlantic Ocean than any event in previous history.
Now, that's cool.
That's very cool.
So this was something in this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, that was so important. It was reaching Europe at the time.
It was, and especially people in France and Great Britain were quite fascinated by this. Now, the people in the U.S. and wherever the trial could reach, they were convinced, and especially William Jennings Bryan had touted this, that this was going to be the final duel between evil and good, between the devil and God, between all these things. And so they were expecting the outcome to settle the question once and for all. Did humans evolve from non-humans, or were they specially created? Okay,
so that's good, because that leads me right into kind of my next thought here, which is, what happened, right? How did this play out, right? A lot of people on the secular or non-religious or science-minded side talk about this trial almost as if it's like this, super awesome thing that happened. So, okay, so we're all excited about it. This is a big deal. Like, what happened? Did we actually settle the question? Are humans monkeys? Did God create everything in 6 days? I mean, what happened, man?
Well, as far as the final answer to that question, I don't think it really settled things for all time.
We're still talking about
We're
it?
still talking
Oh,
about it,
gosh.
and as we can talk about in a while, in 1996 and in 2011, and also in 1973, the state legislature once again attempted to limit the teaching of evolution in public schools.
Okay.
So, as the trial proceeded, the jury was selected, and it was 12 all white men.
Of course.
And there was one person who didn't declare himself to be particularly religious, but the other 11 did. There was the judge who presided over the trial was named Ralston, and Judge Ralston was a fundamentalist lay preacher. He
Okay.
also made several comments during the trial, such as, if the Bible is involved, I'm always for it. So it wasn't exactly like he was a was non-partial. He also had to make several rulings, like, for example, right away, the defense objected to opening court with Christian prayers. And he said that he would take it under advisement. He never did say that prayers could not be used. And he left it up to the town's association of ministers to decide
Interesting.
who would give the prayer every single day. As the trial began, most of it was about procedure. So, for example, the defense wanted to bring in scientific testimony from experts who
Sure.
they had brought from all over the country. The prosecution objected to that, and it took the judge a while to decide whether or not they could testify. And during all this time, the jurors who thought that they would have front row seats at the trial,
Right.
they were convinced, oh boy, I won the lottery. I'm going to get to see the whole thing. Well, they were excluded from the trial except for about 3 hours. So over the 9 days of that, then they were, too bad. They just couldn't be there. So as far as the trial itself, once it began, most of it was arguing about procedure.
Interesting.
And the judge eventually ruled that the scientific experts could not testify, that their testimony would have no relevance in whether or not John Scopes broke the law. The defense wanted to get the judge to declare the law unconstitutional, and there was no way that he was going to do that.
Sure.
So they proceeded on without much substance for the defense, since their experts had been ruled irrelevant.
Right.
Then two boys who had been in Scopes' class testified that he had taught them evolution. There are several accounts of this, so I'll give you the most creative one.
Yeah.
In order for them to be able to say, yes, Mr. Scopes taught me about evolution, then one account has it that on the morning that they were going to testify, Mr. Scopes and the boys went out and sat in a taxi, and he taught them about evolution. That way they could say, yes, Mr. Scopes taught me about evolution.
Right outside the courthouse, right before they run in.
Pretty
Just
much.
real quick, let me
Yeah.
tell you, this is how it happened.
Exactly.
That's fascinating, man.
It's interesting, and it helps you to understand that the people of Dayton call this a setup. And some of them weren't very happy about that, but it was still bringing in a lot of money to
Absolutely.
the community. So they were, everybody was pretty much complicit about that. So the boys testified, and then Effie Robinson, who was the chairman of the school board, and Walter White, who was the superintendent of schools, they all testified that Scopes did that. And then pretty much the prosecution rested their case. Well, more procedure, more speeches. In fact, speeches were the big thing about the Scopes trial. And one of the defense lawyers named Dudley Field Malone, who represented the American Civil Liberties Union, he was scandalously married to a woman who was a suffragette. And she, she had the audacity to not change her last name when she got married. So
What a hussy.
I tell you, when she checked into the hotel under her own name, staying with her husband in the room, it was quite the scandal that Doris Stevens and Dudley Field Malone were together in a room, and they didn't even share the same last name.
Wow.
Well, Dudley Field Malone one day in the trial gave a speech about the truth, and it became the best speech of the whole trial. it's not so well known in history as the last day, 2 days of the trial, but at the same time, it was really important. It was so well received that the crowd in the courtroom, who had already been applauding and trying to
Right.
take part, they started applauding, and the applause was thunderous. The bailiff stood at near the judge's podium and started rapping his nightstick on the thing, and another police officer came over and said, "Do you want me to help you restore order in here?" And he said, "I'm not rapping this to get order. I'm rapping this out of applause." That was the greatest speech I've ever heard. Even
Really?
William Jennings Bryan, who the speech was opposing William Jennings Bryan's ideas, but he turned to Dudley Field Malone and said, "Dudley, that was the greatest speech I've ever heard." So that, and John Scopes in his biography said, "This was the most important thing in the trial for me."
Interesting.
Yeah, it was just such a powerful thing.
That is so opposite of what I would have expected.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And I think one of the things that is super fascinating about this whole story is how that interplay from the two sides goes back and forth, and honestly how a lot of these proceedings, it feels kind of like they're a bit more on the same side than what's actually occurring in the courtroom, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that they didn't really hate each other. Now,
Right.
if we move to today, we're so polarized,
Sure.
of course. But these two sets of attorneys, even though they had heated exchanges in the classroom, for example, one of the attorneys general and Clarence Darrow became very good friends. Clarence Darrow even went back to Dayton years later, and they went fishing together because they had become, after the trial, almost on a daily basis, they would go up to, his name was Stewart, and they would go up to his office and drink whiskey together. Now, this was during Prohibition, so it was pretty scandalous. They would drink whiskey together and became really good friends. In the courtroom, to read the transcripts, you would think that they were as polarized as we
Right.
are today.
Right.
But at the same time, they, for them, it was fun. It was a job, and it was fun. And they knew that the stakes were not so drastic that John Scopes was going to be imprisoned or anything. The biggest fine that he could get would have been $500. So it wasn't a life or death situation. What they were trying to do was settle this argument and see if the law could stand.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, and I'm so glad you brought it to today as well, because again, there's so much about the whole proceedings. There's so much about the individual questions that were being asked and attempting to get answered here that we are absolutely still seeing today.
Yes, we are.
But before we do that, so we have to know, okay, obviously, right? Scopes was freed. Everything was good. We could teach evolution in schools. Everything worked out super well, and everybody celebrated, right? I mean, that's how it ended, right?
Well, not exactly.
Okay. What happened? How did he get convicted?
He was convicted, and but before he was convicted, on the next to the last day of the trial, a really strange thing happened.
Okay.
And that is that since the defense had no witnesses, because the judge had ruled them all irrelevant,
Right.
then Darrow's plan was to bring in an expert on the Bible. And then he was going to try to show that the Bible could not be taken literally in every situation. The expert that he chose was William Jennings Bryan.
Oh boy.
And this is so weird. I mean, for the people who are listening who can remember the O.J. Simpson trial, this would be like Marcia Clark. This would be like Johnny Cochran calling Marcia Clark to the witness
Sure.
stand to testify on behalf of O.J.
Yeah.
Well, so William Jennings Bryan was called to the witness stand as an expert on the Bible, and the prosecution team said, no, we don't want this. And William Jennings Bryan said, I'm not afraid to do this. I'm here to testify for the Bible, that's fine. So the courtroom was really packed. There were sometimes as many as 750 people in the courtroom, which was built for about 200 people to be there. There were, It was a very hot time in July, so the men were wearing suits that were wool. This was before deodorant. I mean, it was really a horrific, heated
The
situation.
reenactment was way better.
Yeah, it was in the air conditioning, wasn't it? So the judge at one point said, "I'm afraid that the building's going to collapse." Maybe he was, and that was probably a legitimate concern. But he declared that they would go outside and have the rest of the trial for that day on the courthouse lawn under the shade tree. They put up benches for the crowd to sit in. And at that time, once they got outside, then Darrow called Bryan to the witness stand. So all the people outside got to sit in relative comfort and hear Darrow cross-examine William Jennings Bryan on the Bible.
Wow.
And that was considered to be, by many historians, the climax of the trial. What Darrow was able to do was asking questions like, do you believe that there was actually a flood? Do you believe that that Eve was cursed by the serpent? He even said, so the serpent was cursed to go on his belly, and Bryan says yes. And he says, do you know how he went before that? Did he walk on his tail? And so he was really trying to get under Bryan's skin and make him look foolish. The question that he asked him that got the crowd to gasp and be shocked that William Jennings Bryan was not upholding his commitment to fundamentalism was when Darrow asked Bryan, do you think that the earth was made in 6 days? Bryan says, yes. He says, were they 6 days of 24 hours? And Bryan said, I don't think that they were necessarily 24-hour days. And the crowd...
That was a big deal.
That was a huge deal. And at that point, a lot of historians say that Bryan lost that debate. And he stumbled. He was really upset. A lot of people say he was brokenhearted because the crowd at that point was very disappointed in William Jennings Bryan. And it was important to him for the crowd to be supporting him throughout. So the next day, the judge actually adjourned for the day very quickly after that. The next day, they returned and the judge said, I'm happy to expunge this testimony. It has no relevance on this trial whatsoever. And by doing that, then it couldn't be presented to the jury.
Right.
But then at that point, Clarence Darrow also said, well, if you're not going to accept that, we don't have any evidence. Just bring the jury in and let's find him guilty and be done with it.
Really?
And in that way, he prevented Bryan from making a closing argument, and therefore Bryan had no chance to rebut what Clarence Darrow had gotten him to do.
So that was the last chance that he had to, William Jennings Bryan had to actually like put his side out there to like, again, defend the fundamentalist kind of mindset.
That's
and
right.
he never had another, wow.
He never had another chance. He had written a closing argument, and he was able to publish that closing argument in many newspapers. However, that was not the same as being able to present it to the jury, to all that. So what Darrow did was he said he didn't want to say, we want you to find him guilty, because that would have ruined his chances in the appellate courts. So what he said was, we don't see how you could find my defendant not guilty, so therefore we ask you to come back with a verdict. And he was being very careful with his language.
Right.
Then the jury went out. They stayed out for 9 minutes. They came back,
9 minutes.
found him guilty. They rolled the credits. They thanked everybody, and the thing was over. Well, I'm sorry. One important thing happened. The judge had told the jury that if you want to set a fine, that's okay. If you don't, just bring it back in, and I'll set the fine.
Okay.
And so the judge set the fine at $100. When it reached the appellate court, and I'm getting a little bit ahead, but I'll come back.
That's okay.
Right. When it reached the appellate court, which was the Tennessee Supreme Court, said that it was inappropriate for the judge to set the fine. State law said the jury had to. So they said, we're going to throw out the whole thing. If you want to retry the Scopes trial, you can. Nobody ever wanted to do that again. It was a one-off. That was the end of the Scopes monkey trial.
So it he's convicted.
Yes.
He is found guilty of this. He gets $100 fine, which, you know, again, in 1925, still, you know, a bit, not crazy though. You know, wasn't going to bankrupt him or anything. No. But he gets this $100 fine set by the judge instead of the jury. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they just say, on a technicality, throw it out.
The Tennessee Supreme Court. That's right. Yes.
Wow.
And actually, William Jennings Bryan had even offered to pay his fine. If he had done that, then it would be over and the law would stand. I'm sure Bryan was somewhat afraid that if it went to the Supreme Court that the law could be overturned, which it was not. But let's go back to right after the trial.
Right.
Almost everybody's leaving. The Dayton citizens are staying. William Jennings Bryan stayed in the Middle Tennessee area. He preached in several churches. For the next 5 days, he went to northern Alabama, North Georgia, around in central Tennessee.
Wow.
And then he went back to Dayton on the Sunday after the trial. He went to church. He went back to the house where he'd been staying. And he was a notorious overeater. He had diabetes, but he ate a huge Sunday dinner, went upstairs to take a nap, lay down, and died.
6 days after the trial?
5.
5 days after the trial.
Yes.
Holy crap.
And that was a very big deal for America.
Wow.
A lot of people had said, well, William Jennings Bryan must have died of a broken heart because he had lost the debate.
Sure.
When Clarence Darrow was told about this, he was in the Smokies, and Clarence Darrow's response was, well, he died of a busted belly because he had been such a notorious overeater. There was one time, one of the first meals that he had in Dayton, he was sitting next to John Scopes. And it was a big Southern meal, you know, how they would bring in, everybody would bring food, of course. Well, Scopes was talking to him, and Bryan ate his whole plate full of food. And then he looked at Scopes' plate and said, are you going to eat that? Are you going to eat that? And Scopes said no, and so Bryan pulls it over there and starts shoveling it in his mouth.
Oh,
and I mean, he was just, he loved to eat. And
sure.
It's very likely that that's what killed him was the overeating and the diabetes. Yeah.
I mean, how crazy of a story in and of itself, though, is that this guy who had been receiving fame and attention around the country for decades at this point was one of the biggest names in fundamentalism, religion, was a huge name in economics, in politics, the law. I mean, goes out, has this massive, massive moment. He's up there, he's defending, he's doing everything. He has that one stumble, that one moment of, okay, maybe not so much. He wins, and in less than a week, he's dead.
And in less than a week, he's dead. It just put the strangest twist on the end of this really bizarre moment in American history. That's a very good way to portray it. It's so interesting.
It's so weird, and that's so wild. And again, just there's so many people on that secular, that science-minded, you know, that look at this moment in history. And again, it's touted as this really, really cool moment, this really awesome, super duper important. And oftentimes it's touted as like a win for science, but in reality, I mean, in a lot of ways, that side lost.
That side did lose, yeah. And the law stayed in place for the next 42 years.
For the next 42 years.
Yeah.
So it's not until the mid 60s, almost 1970.
1967.
1967 is when that law finally gets repealed.
It got repealed by the state legislature at that time, and several things that had led up to that. One of the most important things as far as the repeal of some of these anti-evolution laws and anti-science laws was the launching of Sputnik. When Sputnik was launched in 1957, Americans were terrified of losing out to the Soviets in science education.
Fascinating.
And I can remember as a child hearing about Sputnik. Now, I was 2 when it was launched, but by the time I was in elementary school, my friends and I were terrified that the Russians were going to be sending brainwaves through Sputnik and turn us all into communists.
Really?
So one reaction to that was for the science curricula in America to be upgraded to what was then called the Biological Sciences Curriculum Studies. And that they made evolution the central organizing principle of biology at that time.
Okay.
Now, the legislature in Tennessee, although they were a little slow in that because that came out in about 1960, by 1967 they were ready to repeal it, and they did. And for me, I was in 6th grade at Robertson Academy Elementary School in Nashville.
Wow.
My teacher, Mrs. Qualls, came in and told us that the law had been repealed. This was in May, and she came in and said, I'm going to show you a little bit about evolution. She drew a timeline on the board and put in the dinosaurs and put in lots of other things. And I don't remember all the details of that, but I remember hearing about that and thinking, wow, this is interesting, because I had been raised in a fundamentalist home where I had heard that evolution was not true, that the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve, is all you should ever really be considered. And then for Mrs. Qualls to do that, for whom I had a lot of respect, I thought maybe this is something to be interested in. And so I give her a lot of credit for being able to help me kind of open my mind to other ideas besides just what I was told as a fundamentalist.
That is so interesting to think about, that literally in your childhood, as you were going to school in Tennessee, the law changed, and now all of a sudden your teacher is literally bringing this information in for the very first time.
It must have been the day following the repeal, which I don't know how many teachers in Tennessee did that. I doubt there were very few.
Sure.
But it certainly had an effect on me, because then I didn't realize it at the time, but most of my career was going to be not only teaching the theory of evolution as the central organizing principle of modern biology, but also becoming an advocate for evolution education.
Right. My God. And you've done, and again, you were a teacher in Metro for what? Almost 40 years.
Almost 40 years.
That's incredible, man. That is really, really cool.
And I'm quite proud of that, because for me, being a teacher, I loved teaching. I loved every single day of it. There were some glitches. There were the most difficult things that came about in my career came from administration and from legislatures and things like that. But as far as teaching students, I loved it. So we can go to the next attempt by the legislature to limit the teaching of evolution.
Yeah, because again, you had kind of touched on this earlier, and so 1925, this law gets passed. This trial happens. It's a huge deal. It's national. It's international. Everybody's talking about it, and actually, it doesn't go the way that a lot of people would think, especially today. It actually goes the opposite. They say, nope, you did the thing. We're keeping the law. 42 years. They finally repeal it. They finally allow evolution in school. And then how many years later?
Well, it would have been 6 years later.
6 years later.
6 years later, the legislature comes up in 1973 in the spring with what they called the Genesis Bill. Now, the Genesis Bill said anytime you talk about evolution in the classroom of the public schools in Tennessee, you also have to give an equal amount of time to the story of creation in Genesis. Now, that's a little strange, because it's a chapter and a half of Genesis, which deals with creation. And by that time in 1973, there are entire courses on evolution. There's so much evidence about evolution, not so much about human evolution by that time, although there were significant fossil finds. But there was just this enormous amount of information. So I was a senior at Overton High School at that time, and I didn't really pay that much attention to it, other than just saying with friends, wow, how are they going to give equal time to Genesis when there's so much about evolution? That law was overturned by the courts. The Americans United for the Separation of Church and State filed suit right away, and within a year and a half, that law was repealed. So that law didn't stand.
Okay. Yeah. So again, 42 years, 6 years later, they try this. Very quickly right after that, it's kicked out. I mean, obviously, that was the end of the story. Obviously, they never tried this again. This isn't something we have to deal with, right?
Well, wrong.
Okay.
In 1988, I had been teaching biology for 2 years at that point.
Wow.
The state attorney general sent out a memo that said, biology teachers, you can teach any scientific theory of origin, including evolution, but you may not teach religious ideas about the origins of life.
Okay.
And that was really nice. That was
Yeah.
great. In 1995, I went to a Metro Science Teachers In service, a biology teacher. The director of science education said all biology teachers need to go to this particular session. So I
Okay.
went, and when I got there, the first thing that these two gentlemen did was hand out copies of the textbook called Of Pandas and People. Now, if you've ever heard of that, that textbook is one that introduces the concept of intelligent design.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What is intelligent design? This is something that was a real big push for a while.
It was. Intelligent design was the concept that everything is so complex that the only reasonable explanation is that it had a designer, an intelligent designer behind it. Now, the textbook that they used, Of Pandas and People, was put out, or was first written with the word creator in it. They realized they couldn't get away with using that textbook by having the word creator, because that implied a religious belief. So what they did was they probably with an unsophisticated word search just went through the book and changed everywhere the word creator was there to intelligent designer.
Easy enough.
Easy enough. In one of the first editions, they forgot, they missed a couple of them and left creator in it. But they did fix that. In 2005, that book was adopted by the Dover, Pennsylvania school board and put into the classrooms. That brought on what was known as the Dover Panda Trial, because the book was called Of Pandas and People. Judge John Jones ruled, after a lengthy trial, he ruled that intelligent design was not science. And that should have taken care of intelligent design for, to say that this is illegal. You cannot do this in the classroom. And that was a really big deal. But if we go back to 1996, as intelligent design is kind of catching on, we had a state senator in Tennessee, from Monterey, Tennessee. His name is Tommy Burks. Tommy Burks wrote out his own bill, and in that bill he said that any teacher who teaches evolution as fact, not theory, shall be dismissed. Those are high stakes for a biology teacher.
Okay.
All right. And first of all, fact and theory are not opposite terms. That didn't, no matter how many times legislators were told that, it didn't seem to matter to them. A theory is an explanation of a set of facts, and in science, it is about as strong as you can get. So, for example, the theory of gravity or the theory of planetary rotation.
Thank you for, because there's all of these other theories out there, like the theory of germs and disease, right? Like the atomic theory.
Theory.
These are all using that same scientific understanding of that word theory, and I really don't know anybody out there pushing back on gravity. I haven't heard anybody. Well, gravity's only a theory. This ball might float up to the sky forever, right?
This is true. And when Tommy Burks introduced his bill, then Steve Cohen, who is now in Washington representing the city of Memphis, added on several amendments. Like, for example, he said, any teacher who teaches gravity as fact, not theory, shall be dismissed. Any teacher who teaches the heliocentric theory of planetary rotation as fact, not theory, shall be dismissed.
Seriously?
He put those on there, and they didn't make it through the vote.
Okay.
There were enough people in the legislature who said, we know what you're trying to do here, but let's just stick with evolution.
Okay.
So Tommy Burks really worked on his bill. The companion bill in the House was presented by Zane Whitson, and Zane Whitson admitted on ABC News that he would be happy if evolution was not taught in the classroom, and that he thought it was only a tale. That was the word that he used. And when asked, are you trying to bring religion into the classroom? He said, I wouldn't deny that.
Wow.
He was at least he was clear and honest about
Yeah.
that. So Tommy Burks really pushed for this bill, and at that time, it was actually a lot of fun for me because I became a person who was outspoken against it and got a
Yeah.
lot of press coverage. I got to be on the front page of the Sunday Times,
That's
Sunday
so
New
cool.
York Times. That was really fun for me. Got a picture in the USA Today with me and John Scopes and Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan when they were saying we're rehashing the Scopes monkey trial
No
in Tennessee.
way.
It was called the Monkey Bill in 1996. And eventually it was defeated because Lieutenant Governor John Wilder implored the Senate to listen to him. He was a Democrat. Tommy Burks was a Democrat too. And he said, I believe in God and God is great, but we need to vote this bill down because he just said, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. You really need to listen to me. So the Senate voted it down and it was dead.
Really?
Yeah. So at that time, Tommy Burks was pretty disappointed.
Sure.
But at the same time, I was relieved and I was also disappointed because the ACLU had told me, okay, if this passes, we're going to let you go on trial. And I was ready to be the next John Scopes of the world. And so I was-
you so close,
so
man.
close, so
Oh my
close, yeah.
gosh, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
And interestingly, one of the reporters from Channel 5 News, on the day that it was defeated, he was in my classroom doing a story, and he said, your 15 minutes of fame is up, right? And I said, yes. And he said, tell me what you want to say. What is it that you would like to say? And so I said, what I want to say is this. The theory of evolution is about how we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves as specially created and given dominion over everything on the planet and make all the rules? Or do we see ourselves as a product of nature, as a part of nature, and their nature has the rules and we have to obey that rules? So the ecological aspects of these differing ideas were extremely important to me at the time.
I love that.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
love that
Thanks.
thought because I think again in the secular, in the non-religious-y space, a lot of times we get the accusation that, you know, we don't have wonder, we don't have mystery, we don't have the beauty and all of that, fantastic, good, warm, fuzzy feelings that they do in the religious space. But I see the way that you laid that out right there as one of the most beautiful things ever. We're not this separate, apart, us nature type thing. We are an integral part of this really complex system that has been working for a really long time to bring us here. That's cool.
I agree with that. And I think it's just an extremely important concept. And it really dictates how we're going to approach our future.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, Ronald Reagan, Secretary of the Interior, Watts, had said that it didn't really matter how we use our resources because the second coming of Jesus is going to be before the year 2000.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, it didn't
as far as I
happen.
know, that didn't happen. and so, like now, for example, our administration is saying we don't need to worry about ecological problems. We don't need to worry about the environment. We can go ahead and log all the national forests and the old growth. We don't need to participate in climate change mitigation. We don't need to do those things. Well, there's no scientific basis to make those claims. There are scientific bases to say we need to do a lot better.
Sure.
We do need to take these things seriously. So, and I do think that a whole lot of that comes out of this concept of, was the earth created for us to do with what we
Yeah.
want, or are we a byproduct basically of 4.6 billion years of earth history?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, for a good handful of the belief systems, I understand why that thought about, man, the earth's been here for 4.6 billion years. The universe has been here for even longer.
13 billion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Humans have been around for 250,000 years in one form or fashion. Like, I understand why that pushes back in a lot of ways on their beliefs. But for me personally, I mean, I was raised around here in Nashville at a Methodist church. It still sits over on Lebanon Road. And that was never an issue. There was never a fight between human evolution or scientific advancement and knowledge and my religious faith at the time.
Yeah.
And I know this might be getting a little personal, but I want to know, do you think it's possible to hold those two things at the same? Do you think it's possible for somebody to say, hey, yeah, humans did evolve from some ancestor of apes, and also I believe in a God and that God created the world?
Well, I think it's possible to hold those beliefs because a lot of people do.
Okay.
A lot of people have those beliefs. One of the lots of prominent scientists, from Francis Collins
Yeah.
to a gentleman who wrote the biology textbook, co-authored it, that I used for most of my biology career.
Really?
His name is Kenneth Miller, and he is a believer, and he's very open about that. And he has, I mean, I can't really speak for him, but he does hold those two beliefs
Yeah.
Simultaneously.
Yeah. See, that, I think, one of the biggest things that we love to do here, and I think there's a hunger for it out there. Like you mentioned, we're very polarized right now. It feels on practically everything, and it feels like we're getting so much more into that space of just literally whatever you say, I'm gonna take the opposite. You say the sky's blue, I'm gonna say no, it's not.
Yeah.
And the idea of trying to find that commonality and that space where we really can have two different camps coming together to work towards a better world for us. I think that's something that people are wanting again. I think that's something people are seeing as necessary for us to get to that next place. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of really good evidence out there in a lot of fields to say, look, what's happening with the climate right now isn't great, right?
Yeah.
What's happening with species die-off isn't great. What's happening with the availability of resources like water and food and shelter, it's not great. And we have to do something about that. And in my opinion, whether you come to that from we have to do something because there is no God and science will help us and all humans are the same animals as or you come to that from my God created such a beautiful world and it's my job to be the steward of that and I'm supposed to love my neighbor because they are also in the image. I think either freaking way, that's great. That's a place we can see eye to eye on.
I think you're right on that. I think that if we can come together and make some rational decisions about what's happening, then I think that would be just a great place for us to go. One thing that we really need to consider is that we've never had 8.5 billion people on the planet before. 100 years ago, we had about 2 billion people.
Yeah.
We have more than quadrupled our population in 100 years. That has never happened, at least for humans.
Right.
It has never happened before in history, and it's something that we really, really need to take a look at.
That is definitely a good point. And again, I think as crazy as it is to think about, this trial that happened 100 years ago still has so much relevance for all of that. And how we actually progress in terms of thinking about that limited space and that limited capacity that we have.
I think you're right. And if what we're doing is sitting around waiting for a supernatural bailout to take us out of this mess, then I don't think that that's ever been effective in the past.
Right.
And therefore, it's probably a lot more rational to say, here are the things that we need to do, and let's get started on them, because if it's not too late already, it's going to be too late very, very soon.
Right. Man, that is so. There is still so much with this too. Honestly,
still so much
there
with
there
this,
is, and you've been going around a bunch of places this year. You've been doing
I have.
all kinds of. Tell us
Yeah.
some about that. Like, who are you speaking to? What are you talking about? What are they asking?
I've been speaking to pretty much anyone who will listen.
Yeah.
I have spoken to Americans United at the national conference. Vanderbilt just very recently had a symposium
Right.
that was all about the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial, and I was invited to speak at that, which I did. And that symposium, all the speakers on that symposium, which include some really prominent
Yeah.
scientists, Ed Larson, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning book on the Scopes trial,
Oh, wow.
Randy Moore, who's a Scopes trial expert, Sean Carroll, who's the
Oh, wow.
evolutionary physicist, evolutionary biologist. And so, I mean, I was quite honored to get to be there. And almost all of the presentations from that are on YouTube now,
Really?
under Vanderbilt Scope Symposium. And I've also spoken at some high schools. I've spoken at some community meetings. Again, I'll speak to whoever
Yeah.
will ask me.
Yeah, yeah.
And at that point, I can also say that I have an email account set up just for this. And that email address is very easy. It's scopesteacher@gmail.com.
Perfect.
It's pretty easy.
Perfect, yeah.
And I also can provide a link to anybody who's interested in that condensed transcript of the last 2 days.
Yeah.
And also, I did put a link to my presentation at Vanderbilt on the same page. So
Oh,
if
fantastic.
if anyone would like to email me, then I'll be
and
glad
we'll
to
we'll
send
get
them.
all that information
Sure.
from you too,
Okay.
and make sure we have it in there so people can find that
That'd
and
be
they can
great.
reach out to you with any questions
That'd
and
be great.
stuff. Because again, it's so weird to think about how, in some ways we've made huge advancements in the last 100 years, and in other ways we haven't moved a muscle,
I
because
think you're right.
there's still a push in the Tennessee legislature
Yes.
in regards to what can be taught, what can't be taught, how much religion is allowed, how much science is allowed, and I mean, what is the state of that? If you're familiar, like, is
I
that
am.
a huge thing?
It is a huge thing still. That can take us to 2011 when
Yeah.
another bill was introduced into the legislature. This one was done introduced into both houses. And the idea of that bill in 2011 was teach the controversy. That
Teach
the
the
bill stated in lots of colorful language and flowery language that teachers may feel uncomfortable about introducing concepts, and therefore they should respectfully respond to differences of opinion about evolution, climate change, human cloning, and those kind of things. So that bill got debated. I got to testify to the Senate committee, and there's a really interesting exchange between Molly Miller, who's a geology professor at Vanderbilt,
Okay.
and a man named John DeBerry, who was a legislator from Memphis at the time.
Right.
And now he is senior advisor to Governor Bill Lee. After Molly Miller testified, and she used a phrase that you used, she said, I can't imagine this body debating whether atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Therefore, that's not a scientific controversy, and neither is evolution.
Right.
And John DeBerry's response was, I feel offended that you would come in here and present yourself as a standard. Just because you have prefixes and suffixes on your name doesn't make you a standard. And therefore, I'm offended. And he said, whether I vote for this or not, it doesn't matter. You have offended us by coming in here and telling us we're a bunch of idiots. He actually used that phrase.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that bill stalled in the Senate, but in 2012, they were able to pass it without much fanfare. I mean, without really much publicity at all.
Right.
And it became law. So it is now a law that's still in the classroom, that differences of opinion have to be considered in the science classroom. Now, there is a problem with that, a huge problem, and that's that it presents science as a democratic process in which
Yeah.
all opinions matter. And science is based on facts and evidence, and opinions are mostly irrelevant. I like what Neil deGrasse Tyson says, whether you believe something or not has nothing to do with whether or not it's true.
Absolutely.
So, and that's what science is trying to tackle. But in the classroom, if now, by law, if a student says, I want to discuss the controversial idea that eclipses are caused by shadows, when in my culture, eclipses are caused by a giant serpent coming up and swallowing the moon.
Yeah, technically, this has to be debated. This has to be something
It has
that,
to be respected in the
yeah.
classroom. So students are by law allowed to bring up things like that. And of course, there are so many. All the ideas of astrology.
Right.
If somebody brings those up, they have to be considered in the
I
classroom.
mean, if that genuinely, if because that law would have been passed right as I was graduating high school, right? And if somebody were to sincerely want to bring up all of these other, you would absolutely never get through the biology textbook.
Well, what you have just said is something that I presented to the Committee on Education in the Tennessee Senate. And I really am sorry to say that on that day, there were 9 senators seated listening to they were present at my testimony. And according to Jerry Winters, who was present, and he was the TEA representative at the time, he said that 3 of them were paying attention. 6 of them were on their laptops, on their phones. They were not listening to anything I had to say.
They'd already made up their mind.
And what I told them was that this is not about saving souls. This is about how well the students do on standardized tests,
Sure.
in which they're compared to students across the state, the nation, and the world. That's what science classes need to be teaching. And I also told them that as a reader of AP exams, which I had been doing for about 7 years at that time, that there had never been a question on an AP exam that said, tell us your opinion on this. Discuss the merits of intelligent design versus the theory of evolution. The tests are about demonstrating knowledge of scientific concepts.
Right.
And when you waste time in class talking about astrology, when you waste time talking about other creation myths from around the world, because there are hundreds of creation myths from around the world, then you can't really do what you've set out to do. And it hurts Tennessee students because they're hearing all this stuff that is irrelevant to the standardized tests that are being pushed so hard by legislatures and Congress. The No Child Left Behind Act just brought on standardized testing like crazy. And then there are laws being passed that will say we have to waste time on all these other things when what we should be focusing on by their own standards is standardized tests and how well students are going to do on that.
Right. And I think that is such an interesting through line that you just highlighted right there, because again, what you had said about Scopes teaching in Dayton was he was using the state approved textbook.
That's a very good point.
And that was crucial. It was a fundamental principle that the state had said, like, yeah, you actually can't learn this stuff without it. And that takes us right to today.
It does.
The standardized testing, the AP, the IB, all of these colleges are going to require this basic level of knowledge.
That's right.
And you've got these people that simultaneously seem to be approving these things and pushing them and also fighting against them. That doesn't...
Well, and to give a couple of anecdotes about that as far as dealing with parents who were opposed to the teaching of evolution. It was probably in the late 90s, but I was becoming known as an evolution teacher because of all the national media attention. And there are two nice examples. One mom called me, and she was adamant that her child was not going to be in the classroom when I taught about evolution. And that's pretty tough when it's the central organizing principle of the course, and it's not like you just teach it for an hour. It's every single day.
Right.
Yeah. So I said, okay, that's fine, but I want you to know that if they are excluded from that, when they go to compete for scholarships or for
Uh-huh.
college admissions, they're going to be at a great disadvantage because they haven't learned about the basic organizing
Right.
principle of biology. And at that point, I kind of call it hitting them in the pocketbook. But she said, okay, all right, never mind then. Another good example is a young man who was, as you said before, holding the two beliefs simultaneously,
Yeah.
or the two concepts simultaneously. And he was always against the idea of evolution, but a very, very nice young man. He went to compete for a scholarship at Carson Newman College, which is a Baptist school in East Tennessee.
Yeah, yeah.
He got there it was an essay competition, sat down, they asked about the theory of evolution.
No
and since
way.
he knew so much about it, he wrote eloquently of why he was against it. And they not only liked it, but they gave him a full ride to Carson Newman College.
Because of the knowledge that he actually had on evolution.
That's right, yes.
Even though he was writing against it
That's
at
right.
a Baptist Christian college.
That's right, yes.
That's fascinating.
That was fascinating. And one more quick one. Mom called, just adamant that her child was not going to be in the classroom. I said, okay, it's up to you. When I teach about evolution, if she wants to leave, I'll write her a library pass and she can go. And she said, okay, all right, well, that's what's going to happen. So the next day in class, the girl comes up to me and says, are you going to teach about evolution? I said, yes, I am. And she said, well, I need to go to the library. I said, okay. Wrote her a pass. She went to the library. The next day she came back. There was never a time that she asked about going to the library again. And the deal was she was able to say to her mother, yes, I left the classroom when he was teaching about evolution. But of course, every day after that was about evolution, of course. And also she, did well on the test, but she was able to tell her mother, I left. And after that, her mother was satisfied. So she wanted to be in there,
Fascinating.
but she was able to tell her mother, I did what you wanted me to do.
That is another really, really cool thing to highlight throughout this whole story is the desire and drive for so many people, especially younger people, to learn. That the stifling of a whole generation of just learning about the world around them and growing to understand and being more connected. Like you said, learning that we are an integral part of this system of nature and these cycles around us. Learning that stuff is something that seems to be kind of like this innate thing in people.
Yeah.
And to go against that just feels so frustrating and so wrong and so just, quit it, you guys.
Well, it's like Dudley Field Malone said at the Scopes trial, the truth always wins.
Yeah.
So no matter what our beliefs are, the truth is separate from that.
Yeah.
And the truth is going to win, whether it's in favor of us or not.
Right.
It remains to be seen, but the truth always wins.
I love that, man. I think that is so awesome.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's still so much about this that
There's
we
still
could talk
so much
about this.
well,
there
yes.
is like, I mean, again, there's years and years and years of study that people have done to write all these different books. There's all these different, Inherit the Wind is something people may be familiar with. The town of Dayton does their own reenactment. Again, that we got to
Fun.
participate
Yeah.
in. We were actually
on the jury.
That was so cool, man. That was a really fun thing. We got to go read some lines of actual people that were brought up to be on the jury and the questions that were asked of them. And it was a really, really interesting moment to be in that space, to be there with people who were so invested in it, and to just get a little bit of an understanding of kind of what has been the, if you'll let me use it, evolution of scientific discussion in this country and specifically in this state that you and I are both so connected to.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and those things are still coming up, and I'm sorry that there are still a lot of people who see a war between religion and science. It doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
But when it does come up and people try to use their own personal opinions, their own personal beliefs to tamp down the other side, then that becomes a really unfair process. And especially when those attempts become law, that becomes a really difficult thing for us to be able to reconcile.
And that's where, again, the you know, a big focus for me for a long time, and a big focus of this organization and channel and stuff, is about secularism, which for many people, I hear this from a couple of different sides. For many people, they think that means no religion. They think you're not allowed to believe in a God. You can't have a divine essence. You can't think about the afterlife and stuff. But in reality, what secularism is supposed to be is an equal, neutral space. If we have a space for the religion, well, we just have to have spaces for others too, and we just can't dictate and mandate that in a legislative way, like you were saying. I think that is one of the greatest things about our nation in so many ways. And that, again, I think goes back to Malone's speech of the truth will win. If we give that neutral platform.
I think you're right. And I think that neutral platform is being eroded. And I'm so sorry to see that. I really, like, for example, in the 1980s, when the Attorney General sent us the memo, I thought, we are really making progress here. And then to see that turned around and come back to, I'm right because I believe. Yes. I like what Neil Young said in his song, do you think you believe in yours more than they do theirs somehow? And when it's a question of, I believe more than you do, so I must be right, then that's when we get into a whole lot of trouble. If we could set that aside, if we can say, let's listen to everybody, let's give everybody equal footing, as you're saying, then I think we're going to be in a lot better shape. What I find is that so many people will not consider other people's ideas. And I'm really happy to hear other people's ideas, and I'm really happy to consider them. And I hope that other people are willing to consider my ideas while I'm listening to theirs.
I think that's the only way we're ever going to continue to grow.
I think you're right.
So, okay. Final couple of things. I'm going to do a couple of rapid fires real quick.
Okay,
We'll have a little fun with some of these.
I'm ready.
Okay, so first off, what happened with Scopes? He has this trial. It goes through the appeal. He didn't even have to pay the fine. Like, does he become a super big celebrity? Is he a big deal? What happened? What does he do?
That's a great question. He didn't like the publicity. There was a scholarship fund that was created for him to attend the University of Chicago.
Really?
So he went to the University of Chicago, and he got, he studied in graduate school, studied geology. He eventually became a geologist for an oil company, went to Venezuela, did work for them there,
Really?
met his wife. They got married. Unfortunately, he never was able to have a normal life after that. So he did descend into alcoholism. He did have a hard time. He was always uncomfortable with his celebrityhood. He did do some things like in 1960, the movie version of Inherit the Wind was debuted in Dayton, Tennessee at the drive-in, which was cool. And he, I think he did attend that. He accepted the notoriety of that, but he wasn't always very happy about that. In 1970, he attended the celebration of the Scopes trial in Dayton, and actually spoke at Peabody College, or went to Peabody College, where another person, Susan Epperson, who had been involved in the Arkansas anti-evolution legislation, and there's great photographs of them sitting together and probably sharing their ideas. But Scopes, he, as I said, he got married, and I think he had two sons.
Really?
Anyway, he I can't remember the date of his death, but it was in the 1970s. Yeah. So Scopes never taught again. That was probably unfortunate for him, but at the same time, it just wasn't going to be the case that he could he could be a regular person anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's so interesting, man.
very
Okay.
interesting.
Okay. Another quick rapid fire.
Sure.
Did we come from monkeys? Is that true? Do humans actually they have monkey ancestors? Tell me. Where in my family tree is there a monkey?
There is probably not. The better way to say that is humans and apes and monkeys all evolved from a common ancestor. Now, I mean, you can say that about everything on Earth, right? Every
Right.
living thing. Our most recent common ancestor was was the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees. That's why we're probably best known in the scientific community as The Third Chimpanzee, which is a great book, by the way, The Third Chimpanzee by Jared Diamond. And we are so closely related to chimpanzees that we really, I think, shouldn't be in a separate genus. We should still be in the same genus with chimpanzees. Our common ancestor, you could probably say 5 to 6 million years ago.
Wow, very cool. Okay, so is there something special about people? Are we so, like, biologically speaking, are we so, it feels like we're really different. I mean, I look at a fish, I look at a dog, it feels like, yeah, okay, they got, there's some hair, there's some nervous system or whatever, but like, it feels like humans are really, really separate. That kind of feels like it's pointing towards the creationism thing. Are you saying not really?
I think that our specialness is mostly about our ability to produce language, to produce speech. If we start doing DNA comparisons, that's a really good indicator of how closely related we are to other creatures. So, for example, the consensus is about 99.8, 99.9% of our DNA is identical to that of a chimpanzee. And
Identical.
identical. Yes.
Like you're saying, you start at the beginning. You've got a human. You've got a chimp. You can go almost all the way to the freaking end, and you wouldn't know what's what.
Well, except for the few differences, which are a fraction of a percent. However, that's a fraction of a percent of about 3 billion nucleotides.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
that does make us, that's pretty significant. But one way that I like to present it is that if you consider we have 46 chromosomes, biological males, biological females have one chromosome which is different. Well, that's a little above 2%. Now, if you take a biologically male gorilla and a biologically male human, our DNA is closer than a biological human male and a biological human female.
So there is less than 2% difference there.
Right.
That is so freaking cool, man.
It's pretty free. It's so interesting to show what a close relationship we have, especially with chimpanzees.
Yeah.
And of the two species of chimpanzee, the bonobos are, they're capable of so much interesting stuff.
Absolutely.
They didn't really evolve in the same direction that we did. They became very successful until we started destroying their habitat. But we are just so closely related to those things that
Wow.
I think that's probably, for me, that's the best evidence of human evolution that you could find.
Yeah, I love that. And then, of course, also we have this massive collection of hominid fossils, right?
That gets larger all the time. In the 1960s, when our state legislature first overturned the Butler Act, we had very, very few human ancestor fossils. Now we have so many, and it just continues to build and build and build, and just more and more evidence piled upon more and more evidence all the time about what our ancestry is like. So we keep changing it because the nature of science is you don't get to say this is absolutely true. Everything is subject to revision.
Yeah.
Therefore, anytime that we bring in new evidence, we sometimes have to make a few adjustments about what our standards are, what we find the truth to be.
Yeah.
So if we stop saying, like for example, William Jennings Bryan in the Scopes monkey trial said, I have all the information I want to live and die by. He was not interested in anything that could come up that could contradict his literal interpretations of the Bible.
Okay.
Now, science does the opposite of that. Science says, if you have something, bring it on.
Right.
I would often ask students to put on a number line between 1 and 10, with 1 being non-evolution, 10 being evolution. Where does your evolutionary thinking lie? And it was interesting to see because it was all over the place.
Yeah.
But and they would ask me, Mr. Roberts, what about you? Where do you put yours? And I
Yeah.
said, well, it's not on 10. It's pretty close. But science has to be subject to revision. So
Sure.
I am very convinced that this is most likely to be true.
Right.
But if somebody comes along with evidence that contradicts it, I have to accept that scientific evidence.
I love that, and there's so many different great avenues there that we can go. But just real quick, I mean, is there stuff in evolutionary biology that we still just don't know? Is there stuff that's a mystery?
Oh, absolutely. So yes, absolutely.
And that doesn't undermine the information that we have about human evolution. That doesn't, those holes in the biological understanding don't completely collapse everything?
They do not. If anything, once we learn about those, as you say, the holes in the understanding, then they tend so far to bolster the theory of
Really?
evolution.
That's
Yes.
really cool.
That's very
That's
cool.
really cool, man.
And if there's evidence against the theory of evolution, bring it on. The
Right.
scientific community says, yeah, we want to hear it.
Right.
But it needs to meet the standards of scientific evidence too.
Okay, that's good too, because that's another thing is like, well, you know, I read my Bible and it said this, or I prayed and it's like, well, okay, that doesn't exactly meet, that doesn't hit the standard for us.
That's right. That's
Okay.
that's a completely different arena.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to go down
Sure.
those avenues. However, if you want to present it as science, then it doesn't qualify.
Okay, and that takes me to my final little rapid fire question, which
Great.
is,
This is fun.
are you, Wesley Roberts, Mr. Scope's Monkey Trial, are you trying to destroy religion and the religious mindset? You're bringing in all this science. You're saying, keep your God out of my laboratory. Are you attempting to take away all of this religious mindset from people?
I am not, but what I am trying to do is keep it out of the science arena.
Yeah.
If you want to have your beliefs, and there are so many different ones. I mean, you know, let's face it, the denominations can't even agree
Right.
on what's going on. I apologize for bringing up the Book of Mormon, the play, because you know, I realize it's controversial, but there's a great line in the Spooky Mormon Hell Dream which says the young man is afraid of going to hell, and he's going to be down there with all the Catholics and Jews. And you know, if you start looking into denominations, there are so many of them that say we're right and you're wrong and you're going to hell. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the theory of evolution. So
Right.
I am not trying to destroy anybody's religion, but it would be nice if people would allow for that evolutionary thought to come into their lives and say, I'm willing to entertain any ideas. Aristotle said it is the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it.
Ooh, I love that.
That's good.
I love that, man.
very
And I love, again, that idea of us being able to come together, even if we don't agree on everything, just in a similar spirit as I think is present throughout the whole Scopes Monkey trial,
Yeah.
where these individuals are coming together to say, it's not about you as a person, right? I can treat you well. I can respect you as a person, and we can talk about these ideas over here, and that, hashing that out and trying to understand that and still being cordial with each other and still trying to make a community. That's a big deal.
That's a big deal. And wouldn't it be nice if we were doing more of that these
Oh my
days?
gosh,
Yes.
if only.
And wouldn't it be nice if we could reach a consensus on what establishes truth, and
Yeah.
then start accepting truth as our guideposts?
I love that, man. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Elliott. This has been really fun.
I
It's been fun.
absolutely enjoyed this. I
Good.
know everybody out there is going to enjoy this.
Good.
I know one of the number one things, because we did this awesome trip out to Dayton,
Yeah.
again, almost to the day of the trial. It was like one day off.
Yeah.
And you know, when we were driving out there, you gave this phenomenal presentation
On a bus.
on
that
a
was
bus.
so cool to give a presentation on a bus. I've never done that before.
Like it was like 30, 40 people
It was
were
great.
hanging out.
I had a great time.
And we're just regular people from Middle Tennessee area that heard about this thing and wanted to do it. And one of the number one things, again, there were a good couple of us that were on the jury for this reenactment. We went around the town for a few hours, had some great food. One of the number one things that people commented on was your
Oh,
presentation.
good. I wasn't aware of that. That's really nice.
Absolutely adored it. Absolutely loved it.
Good.
And yeah, we just thought, oh my gosh, we got to get you in here. We got to talk to you, man. And if you're okay with it, we will definitely bring you back.
I would love to come back. And also, I will say that if anybody who's watching this has an organization and they
Yeah.
would like a presentation, then please email me,
Absolutely.
scopesteacher@gmail.com, and I would be happy to, if I can, to give a presentation.
That's awesome, man. And we will make sure that information and that Google Drive with all of that other really, because you've got some stuff, some audio clips of people, some pictures, and some really, I mean, on the ground, hands-on type of stuff. Again, this has been a huge player in your life.
Oh, a very big player in my life. Yeah. Sometimes I'm very proud of accomplishments that I've had, and my involvement in evolution education is one of which I am particularly proud.
That is amazing, man. That is so freaking cool. And again, I know we're gonna have you back. I know there's gonna be people out there that are saying, "Oh my gosh, I've got questions."
Yeah.
I'd
love to answer them.
good.
Yeah.
Hit him up, you guys. Send him a message, and hang around with us in the future because I know we will have you back, Wesley.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother.
Okay. All right.
All right.